My abusive ex owes me $500 and court doesn't seem like enough. I, 23F, was in a relationship with a guy, 24M, for 6 months. Prior to this, I had been single for a while after a difficult 3-year relationship, and I finally felt ready to take dating seriously again. That's when I met him. About 2 months into our relationship, my lease was nearing its end. I had lived in my apartment for 3 years and wasn't fond of it, but I was planning to renew the lease since it was affordable. However, he suggested that I move in with him instead. At the time, he was living with his best friend and the friend's girlfriend, whom he absolutely despised. Around the same time, I'd started a new job. Unfortunately, tensions arose between us and his roommates, who became jealous and insisted we pay more than our fair share of the bills. I was willing to cover the additional cost, but my boyfriend was adamant that he wanted to take care of me, promising that if we moved in together, I wouldn't have to pay anything. I offered to contribute, but he insisted on handling everything. As a result, he decided to leave the apartment due to the ongoing disputes. A month later, we moved into a new place together, and things immediately started going downhill. Prior to this, I had never lived with a partner, but I figured that, given all the challenges I'd faced in life, how bad could it be? I soon found out. He picked an apartment that was far too expensive, despite my warnings that it wasn't a wise financial decision. He reassured me that the $1,800 monthly rent was manageable for him, as it was only half of his income. Since my new job paid me more than he made, I had to co-sign the lease to meet the income requirements. Looking back, I realized that was a mistake. From the moment we moved in, the relationship turned abusive. He had butt me twice, slapped me on multiple occasions, and repeatedly tried to force himself on me. If I refused sex, he would scream at me for days. He threw things, called me every name in the book, and even attempted to force himself on me while I was drunk, gagging, and having a panic attack. Financially, things were just as disastrous. He immediately used up our 6 weeks of free rent, and when the time came to start paying, he was short. The first time, it was only about $200, which I covered without much issue. The following month, I asked him on the 31st if he had paid the rent, and he assured me he had. However, the next morning, he called me in a panic, begging for $580. I was furious because I had worked extra hours to earn an additional $500 that paycheck, and he had essentially taken all of it. He promised to pay me back, but later gaslight me, claiming he never agreed to cover the entire rent. At that point, I agreed to split the rent with him under the condition that he start paying for his own groceries, as he consumed food at an alarming rate. Even though I paid half the rent for the next 2 months, he never once contributed to groceries. Eventually, I reached my breaking point. I had to break up with him 4 times before it actually stuck. He admitted that he couldn't handle living together, but he also threatened to ruin my credit if I left the apartment. By that time, I had furnished the entire place myself, covering everything from furniture to groceries, gas, and Wi-Fi. If I left, he wouldn't even have had a chair to sit on. In the end, he was the one who moved out. The breakup, however, dragged on for 2 months. Initially, he agreed to continue paying his half of the rent for 3 months, giving me time to figure things out. That promise fell apart quickly. He would constantly call me, sometimes berating me, and other times trying to be friendly. If I didn't entertain his conversations, he would suddenly claim he couldn't pay his half of the rent. Every first of the month, it was the same cycle. He'd block me, forcing me to create new phone numbers just to reach him. Then, after a couple of weeks, he would finally pay his share. This pattern continued for 2 months. I eventually realized that playing nice wasn't getting me anywhere. I decided to demand repayment of the $500 he had shorted me on his last rent payment, as well as another $500 he had owed me for months. He refused at first, but his stance changed multiple times over the course of a month. I considered taking him to small claims court, so I let him know I had evidence of his agreement to pay me back in writing. When I brought this up, he said his mother advised him against paying me, insisting that I had no legal case. His mother, however, had hidden a foreclosure from him, so I pointed out that she might not be the best source of legal advice. His mother had been financially dependent on him throughout our relationship, frequently asking him for money for various things, including purchasing a car. He also had a habit of giving money to friends without hesitation, even when it meant delaying his rent payments. Unsurprisingly, his friends and family all encouraged him not to pay me back, insisting that he owed me nothing. In response, I started receiving messages full of insults, followed by him blocking me repeatedly. I sent him a Cash App request for the $500, which he declined, instead sending me requests with messages like, "You ruined my life." He had said this often, even though our breakup was entirely his fault, and I was the one suffering financially. He blamed me for his situation because he had to move back in with his mother. During our relationship, his car had been repossessed, despite him claiming that his half of the rent was late due to his car payments. After moving out, he also got jumped by someone. Though he never explained why, I suspected it was related to money he owed. At one point, I sent him a request for $54 with a note stating, "This is how little it costs to open a court case against you." This got his attention. He unblocked me and promised to pay me when he could. I demanded a specific date, or I would proceed with legal action. He ultimately sent the first $500, promising to send the rest from his tax refund the following week. Of course, that payment never came. He called several times, trying to argue down the amount he owed me. I countered by listing the numerous things he had broken or failed to pay for. I made it clear that if he wanted to nitpick, I would do the same in court. Reluctantly, he agreed to pay the remaining $500 from his refund. But once again, I was blocked, and no payment arrived. Frustrated, I drafted a final demand for payment letter and delivered it to his mother's apartment, also sending a copy via email. I expected another round of furious messages, but for the first time, I received complete silence. No attempts to make arrangements, no insults, nothing. Now, I'm a day away from filing the lawsuit, and to be honest, it doesn't feel like enough. I want revenge. I've considered exposing his behavior at work, informing his friends about the things he said behind their backs, and even notifying his mother's apartment management about his drug use. However, I don't want his mother and sisters to suffer because of him. At this point, I'm not sure what would bring me closure. Part of me wants to draft another letter demanding he pay to break the lease, but I know that would just prolong this ordeal. The idea of contacting the other people he owes money to and orchestrating some kind of collective action has crossed my mind. Regardless, I'm determined to get